Two engineers join the same team on the same day. Same degree, same interview score, same starting salary. 18 months later, one of them is leading a team. The other is still writing the same category of ticket they started with. Technically excellent, quietly overlooked. Nobody in leadership can quite explain why. If you ask them, they'd probably say the promoted one was just more ready. What the research actually shows is that readiness had almost nothing to do with it. Organizational psychologists have been studying promotion patterns inside technical companies for decades, and one finding keeps surfacing across study after study. Technical skill predicts who gets hired, and it predicts who survives probation. It does not reliably predict who gets promoted past the first few years. Something else takes over, and it's specific enough to name. Start with a 2011 study out of Catalyst, a research organization tracking career advancement across large corporations, including a significant technical workforce sample. Researchers controlled for performance ratings, tenure, and education, then looked at what actually separated people who advanced quickly from equally qualified peers who plateaued. The strongest predictor wasn't competence, it was something researchers call visibility of contribution, whether the work a person did was legible to the people making promotion decisions, not just legible to the work itself. Here's what that actually means inside an engineering org. A brilliant fix buried 3 layers deep in a system nobody outside the immediate team ever looks at genuinely helps the company. It also genuinely doesn't exist as far as a promotion committee is concerned, unless someone specifically surfaces it. Meanwhile, a mediocre fix to a visible, frequently discussed problem, one that gets mentioned in a stand-up, referenced in a post-mortem, cited in a leadership update, becomes evidence of impact almost by accident. The work quality gap between those two engineers might be small. The evidence gap is enormous. This connects to something psychologists call the attribution problem, studied extensively by Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School. Amabile's research on creative and knowledge work found that observers, including managers, systematically struggle to accurately attribute credit inside complex, interdependent systems. When a project succeeds, credit gets distributed based on who was visibly associated with the outcome, not necessarily based on who did the underlying work that made the outcome possible. An engineer who quietly prevents 10 fires nobody sees is, from the promotion committee's perspective, someone who apparently didn't do very much this quarter. An engineer who visibly fights one fire, loudly, in front of leadership, looks like the hero, even if the underlying technical difficulty was smaller. There's a second factor worth naming because it explains a specific pattern that confuses a lot of talented engineers. Researchers studying advancement inside technical fields have found that engineers who advance quickly tend to spend measurably more time translating their work into language non-technical stakeholders can evaluate compared to engineers who advance slowly, even when technical output is statistically identical between the two groups. This isn't about being a better talker in some vague social sense. It's a specific, learnable skill, converting technical decisions into business consequences, not I refactored the authentication service, but I reduced login failures by 40%, which was costing us measurable churn. Same underlying work, completely different legibility to the people deciding who moves up. Here's where it gets specifically uncomfortable for a lot of engineers, because the instinct runs directly against what got them hired in the first place. Most people who become engineers were rewarded for most of their lives for being right. Get the right answer, pass the test, ship the correct code. Self-promotion, actively narrating your own contributions, has historically been treated inside technical culture as a soft skill at best, and vaguely dishonest at worst. Something salespeople do, not something serious engineers should need to bother with. Research on this specific bias, sometimes called the meritocracy myth in organizational psychology, has found that engineers who explicitly believe good work speaks for itself are consistently less likely to advance quickly than engineers who don't hold that belief, regardless of actual work quality. The belief itself becomes a structural handicap because it produces exactly the behavior, staying quiet, that the attribution problem punishes. A third factor researchers keep finding, distinct from both visibility and communication, is what's sometimes called sponsorship, studied extensively by Sylvia Ann Hewlett at the Center for Talent Innovation. A mentor gives advice. A sponsor spends their own political capital actively advocating for someone in rooms that person isn't in. Hewlett's research found sponsorship to be one of the single strongest predictors of advancement speed across technical and non-technical fields alike, stronger than mentorship, stronger in many datasets than raw performance ratings. Here's the part that surprises most engineers. Sponsorship isn't primarily won through skill. It's won through a specific kind of relational visibility, being someone a senior person has actually watched work closely enough on something that mattered to them personally to feel comfortable vouching for. This explains a pattern that looks from the outside like pure office politics, but is actually more structural than that. Engineers who happen to work on projects senior leadership personally cares about get more sponsorship opportunities, not because they sought favor, but because proximity to visible, valued work creates more chances for a senior person to actually witness competence firsthand. Engineers who do excellent, invisible maintenance work on systems, nobody senior is watching simply generate fewer of these moments through no fault of their own. Talent didn't create the gap. Structural proximity did. None of this means competence is irrelevant, and the research is careful about this distinction. A baseline level of genuine skill is almost always required to sustain a promotion once it happens, since visibility without underlying substance tends to collapse quickly under real responsibility. What the research actually shows is more precise than talent doesn't matter. It shows that competence functions as a threshold, not a ranking system. Once you clear a reasonably high bar of genuine skill, additional competence produces rapidly diminishing returns on promotion speed, while visibility, translation, and sponsorship keep producing returns well past that point. Two engineers can both clear the competence threshold easily and still end up on wildly different trajectories because everything happening above that threshold is being decided by a completely different set of variables than the ones that got them hired. There's an honest complication worth sitting with here because this research can easily curdle into cynicism if it's misread. None of this is an argument for manipulation or for performing work you didn't actually do. The engineers who advance fastest and also sustain that advancement long term aren't the ones gaming the system. They're the ones who stopped treating visibility and communication as beneath serious engineering work and started treating those things as part of the actual job, not a distasteful add-on to it. The work was never enough on its own. It was never designed to be. Every study on this keeps landing on the same underlying structure. Technical systems are complex enough that almost nobody making advancement decisions has direct, unmediated access to how good your work actually is. They're making judgments based on signal, filtered through attribution biases, communication gaps, and whoever happened to be standing close enough to notice. The uncomfortable, useful implication is that quietly doing excellent work and waiting to be noticed isn't a neutral strategy. It's a strategy that specifically loses in a system with predictable, well-documented biases about who gets credit and why. The engineer who got promoted in 18 months wasn't necessarily more talented than the one who didn't. They were more legible. They translated technical decisions into language decision makers could evaluate. They made sure the right people actually saw the fires they'd prevented. And they built relationships with people willing to spend political capital advocating for them in rooms they weren't in. If you're genuinely excellent at your job right now and quietly wondering why that hasn't translated into advancement, the answer probably isn't that you need to become more skilled. It's that skill was never the bottleneck you thought it was. What's a piece of work you did that genuinely mattered, but that almost nobody above you ever actually saw? Tell me about it in the comments.